Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to this evening's tropical weather outlook for August 27th, 2026. It is a late in the evening update. It is 10 o'clock Eastern Time. I know I typically don't do videos this late, but wanted to get a video out to you this evening since there are things happening in the tropics. Tropical Storm Dolly is active right now, and I know it's kind of funny that we have a storm named Dolly out there right now. Given what just happened over the last few days. But, we do have a tropical storm out there. It might bring impacts to the Caribbean, so we're going to go over that. And of course, I'll also take a look at other activity as well, briefly, in the Pacific. So lots to go over this evening. Let's get started first off by looking at the National Hurricane Center map right now. And there we have it here in the central MDR, Tropical Storm Dolly, which became named earlier today. And finally, after several weeks now of watching these tropical waves, struggle across Africa, move off Africa, and struggle across the MDR and have to deal with all of the dry air that's out there and keep on having these chances where it looks like something is going to develop, but it doesn't. We finally have a wave that does developing, even though this probably will not last for too long here, at least in the MDR, as conditions are still very, very, very unfavorable. But at least they were favorable enough that we were able to have at least one thing eke out here and get a name. And as I mentioned before, impacts might be possible to the Caribbean in a few days as this moves on off to the west-northwest. More than likely, again, because of how unfavorable conditions are for development, we are not going to be looking at anything strong. In fact, we're probably going to be looking at this as a remnant system by the time it makes it to the Caribbean. But still, impacts will come, and I'll show you in general what to expect over the next few days. In the Pacific now, we're only going to focus on the Pacific briefly right now, and I'm going to spend the rest of the video talking about the Atlantic and Dolly. But I will go more in depth into the Pacific tomorrow when I do probably a longer video. But it is active out there, very, very active. We're producing name storm after name storm at this point. We have Tropical Storm Lowell, Tropical Storm Karina, and Tropical Storm Lala. Believe it or not, Lala is still out there, still churning after many, many days. I think it's been 2 weeks at this point that Lala has just been active and out there, but it is more than likely going to weaken and probably degenerate very, very soon. But even after 2 new name storms that formed, we have another area here, 80% chance, likely another development coming next week. And of course, we have 30% chance in the Central Pacific, and we might have a decent storm out of this, or at least the last time I've checked the signals out here in the Pacific. But again, we'll go more into depth on what to expect here over the next week or so from the Pacific tomorrow. So make sure to stay tuned for that. But for now, most of the focus is going to be on the Atlantic tonight, as of course we do have Dolly out there. And taking a look at a wide shot of the Atlantic, you could see Dolly is, again, kind of not in company right now. Not really much happening across the MDR. Besides Dolly here, there's a weaker tropical wave just to the east of it. And then besides Dolly here in the tropics, things are kind of bare. I mean, very bare, especially throughout the Caribbean. There is really no real moisture or convective activity there right now. Maybe some on-land convection over Cuba and Hispaniola and maybe over Central America. And then there is some frontal activity here off the East Coast, bringing rain to the Northeast, and as well as some severe weather too, and flash flooding. But in terms of the tropics here, Dolly is really our main feature to watch. And even with Dolly itself here, zooming in on it specifically, and apologize for the satellite being a little choppy, but you could see in the frames that are there and not kind of cut off here by the choppy satellite, Dolly is struggling. It's producing sporadic convection, which ends up dying off after a few pulses, but then refiring here. Absolutely a sign of very, very dry air in its surrounding. And there's also probably some wind shear hitting this storm as well. And you could also just generally tell this does not really have a well-built structure. So because of that, taking a look at the National Hurricane Center track here over the next few days, this is really just going to move on off to the west-northwest. Probably will not last for a tropical storm for much longer. maybe for 1 or 2 more days. And then the National Hurricane Center is expecting that by the time we get to the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, this will degenerate into a open wave once again. And reason why? Well, as I've been mentioning and as I've been saying, and I think it's very obvious, dry air very much surrounding on all cylinders pretty much throughout the entire deep tropics. And of course, thanks to El Nino, this is the case. And there's also lots of Saharan air out there. In general, the environment is very stable, very dry, not permittable for convective activity and for, just general cloud tops to form and to consolidate and allow for tropical storms to intensify. When the air is stable, it cannot rise, and that cannot give way to thunderstorms to be birthed. So because of that, a storm cannot intensify, and Dolly is basically just going to be bathing in the dry air and the stable air here, especially in the mid-levels over the next few days. But especially once this approaches the Caribbean, we have that infamous wall of shear that we typically see in an El Nino. Raging wind shear across the Caribbean, widespread values here, upwards of 40, 50, even 60 knots. So the Caribbean in and of itself is going to be a no-go zone for pretty much the entirety of the season at this point, and I think it's already clear because it's end of August and wind shear is still ripping, and that's only going to get worse actually as we get later in the season. But this isn't a favorable pocket of wind shear now here in the eastern MDR, roughly where it's located, right around here. And you can see again greens over it, so favorable wind shear now, but not favorable as this heads further west. So combine those two things together, and it is no wonder as to why the National Hurricane Center is expecting that this will probably die in just a matter of a few days. And taking a look at all the model guidance as well, starting off with the GFS, and just really quickly running it through the next few days here, you can see Dolly, a weak storm right now, a weak signal that's popping up in the model. Enough so, there's obviously a closed center here, and there's definitely some vorticity associated with this because there is some pulse with Dolly, but again, it is very weak, fragile, and as this runs into those unfavorable conditions over the next few days here, you just see how it opens back up into a wave gradually, and then eventually approaches the Caribbean here by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday. And then beyond that, the remnant energy probably crashes into the rest of the northern Caribbean islands here, and that would more than likely prevent any sort of situation where any leftover energy from Dolly in a few days is able to try to reignite potentially in the southwestern Atlantic. And that is a potential solution that we need to keep in mind for down the line, because just looking at the wind shear map here, just by looking at this alone, yes, we have the wall of wind shear near the Caribbean, which this storm will be very likely running headfirst into. But notice, especially in the southwestern Atlantic and closer to home and in Bahamas, lower wind shear values are present. And I think that's a general good representation of how the pattern is going to be probably from here on out, at least till the end of September. We will have very strong wind shear across the MDR, northern MDR, and Caribbean especially. But once this gets into the western Atlantic, things will become more favorable. But it's just a matter of, will this track north enough that it could get into those favorable conditions here, and maybe we will see something reignite further down the line, or like the GFS has here right now, this kind of just crashes into Hispaniola and all the northern Caribbean islands here, and we have land interaction, and because of that, nothing comes of it. And taking a look at the other models too, the European not loading here for some reason. Let's take a look at the European AI and see what it shows, and it basically has the same scenario. And you know what? I'm going to have to give props to it, because the European AI has been showing this scenario for many days now, where unlike the GFS or the Euro or most other models where it had the remnant energy of Dolly making it into the southwestern Atlantic and intensifying once again and blossoming, instead they just showed the piece of energy quickly moving on off to the west-northwest to the point that it ends up diving headfirst into the Caribbean. So once again, it is another win for the AI models, except, although I will say, especially the GFS solutions that we had a few days ago, where we had a hurricane developing out of the MDR and recurving out, I guess you could say that those solutions were always more on the aggressive side. But taking a look at the ensembles here, let's see what they reflect, and do they kind of fall in line with the operational models right now. And I'd say for the most part they do. You can see most of the ensembles here definitely representing something over the next few days in the MDR, but it probably dies out once it gets more towards the Caribbean, again, due to the unfavorable conditions. But also, the other hand, those ensemble members that are able to make it north of the islands and into those more favorable conditions in the southwestern Atlantic do blossom. So again, that's maybe a solution that we have to keep in mind for down the line. Especially in these kind of seasons, you cannot fully take your eyes off of something. And I've told you before, just because we have something that develops in the MDR or doesn't develop in the MDR and it struggles, does not mean that it could continue to persist and try to find favorable conditions further west and end up blossoming closer to home. And again, we've had many instances over the past few years where storms like that have occurred. So as long as there are, at least a few ensembles on some of the models here hinting at that solution, it is definitely an idea to keep in mind. And again, as I showed you with the pattern here with wind shear, it certainly makes sense. And even the Google AI ensembles as well, also hinting at that right now. And, there are definitely a few ensembles here off the southeast coast and in the Bahamas. And there are even some ensembles that reignite whatever piece of energy here left with Dolly in the Gulf. And I think the GFS is also spinning something up here in the Gulf around a week or so out. And actually it becomes a pretty decent spin up here. Not exactly sure if this is entirely associated with Dolly. It seems to come from a random piece of energy that maybe is non-tropical, but then, finds favorable enough conditions that is able to reignite. I mean, we had that set up earlier this year in July. Remember Bertha in the Gulf? That's how it happened. Some sort of non-tropical piece of energy broke off and was able to consolidate and become a tropical storm. And sea surface temperatures are definitely very, very warm here in the Gulf, because they virtually the entire Gulf Coast and the entire Gulf in general, and even the southwestern Atlantic has been virtually untouched for the entire season, because there's been nothing aside for one storm or so in the Gulf earlier on. I think even two, but still, you can see that here with the sea surface temperature anomaly map. Very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies in general across the basin. Even in the eastern MDR here, things are warm. But obviously, in terms of overall activity, it's very likely going to be overwhelmed by the very, very strong El Nino that we have out here in the Pacific. And I've not done an El Nino update specific video in a while, so I might actually do that somewhat soon. But again, just the sheer strength of this El Nino is truly doing a number on the Atlantic this year, even more than I thought so, especially, that we are in the last week of August, and the most we could squeeze out is a weak tropical storm, which will probably last only for about a day or two here in the tropics. So I guess that really just goes to show the kind of setup that we have in the Atlantic this year. But again, that does not, prevent the possibility of something making it further west into what are very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies here. And the actual sea surface temperatures themselves are obviously very, very warm as well. So we got to watch it. We got to watch the tropics here over the next few weeks. Even as things are kind of not very active right now, even though we have Dolly, still expect the unexpected. You never know what can happen. And sometimes, especially in years like this, which tend to be very dead, you have that 1 week where a storm comes out of nowhere and is able to blossom and catch people off guard. And we've had it in years past. In fact, just a few days ago, it was the anniversary of Hurricane Andrew, which precisely did what I just explained right now. a storm that struggled out east in the MDR for most of its lifespan, but once it got north of the islands and near the Bahamas, it blew up and became a monster Category 5 hurricane, which then slammed into Florida. Not saying that that's going to happen anytime soon with anything that we have present right now, but my point is, watch the tropics, expect the unexpected, and in general, during the peak of hurricane season, anything can, and sometimes does happen. So we will be keeping an eye out on Dolly here very closely over the next few days, and of course, to all my friends in the Caribbean, especially the Northern Caribbean, keep an eye out on Dolly as well, as it'll probably bring impacts to you this weekend. More than likely just in the form of heavy rain and gusty winds, which I guess is preferable, especially, again, given the climate that you guys are dealing with right now due to El Nino. So you guys will definitely welcome the rain. But even then still, in terms of tropical aspects, keep an eye out on Dolly, as it will be heading in your direction over the next few days. But with that being said, that's going to wrap it up for tonight's video. Hope you enjoyed what you saw today. If you did, as I always say, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and share this channel with family and friends, because we will continue to be doing these updates on the tropics every single day, except for maybe the 2 or 3 days or so that sometimes I really just need a break and I just need to disconnect for a while, and that's kind of what's been happening over the last few days, which is why I've not posted since the beginning of the week. But I promise you, I'm still here, and we will still be monitoring the tropics, so don't go anywhere, because I definitely won't, and definitely expect a video from me tomorrow, and of course we will be going more in depth on whatever Dolly has in store for us, and of course as well the Pacific too. So we will be watching the tropics in general here over the next few weeks. All right, gonna get out of your hair now, and hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll be back with more tomorrow.